It had its own army, its own warships, its own currency, its own colonies, and the legal right to wage war and sign treaties in its own name. For nearly 2 centuries, the Dutch East India Company was the most powerful business the world had ever seen. By one common estimate, worth more than today's largest technology companies combined. And it died bankrupt, of causes so ordinary you could file them in a ledger. The problem, in the year 1600, was competition. Dutch merchants were sending rival fleets to the same Asian ports, bidding each other up for pepper and down for profit. Every voyage was a separate company, dissolved when the ships came home. The risk was enormous, the returns unreliable, and the Dutch were beating themselves. The solution would be to stop competing entirely. On the 20th of March, 1602, the States General of the Dutch Republic did something no government had done before. It merged the rival companies into one and handed the result a monopoly on all Dutch trade beyond the Cape of Good Hope, the United East India Company. In Dutch, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, 4 letters that would be stamped on cannon, coins and coffins, VOC. Read the charter closely and you find something extraordinary. This private company was granted the right to build forts, to maintain its own armies, to wage war, to sign treaties with foreign rulers in its own name. Powers that belonged to states, handed to a business, because the Republic could not project force that far, and a company could. The line between commerce and conquest was not blurred. It was erased on paper, deliberately. Then came the stranger innovation. That August, the company opened its books to ordinary people. Not princes, not guilds, anyone with money. Over 1,100 subscribers bought in, raising roughly 6.5 million guilders. Servants and shopkeepers held slivers of an empire. It is generally regarded as the first public share offering in history, and the market that grew up trading those shares became the first modern stock exchange. It was governed by 17 men, the Heren. 17, the Gentleman 17, drawn from 6 chambers in 6 Dutch cities, with Amsterdam holding the largest block. They met behind closed doors, set the price of pepper for a continent, and answered to shareholders who had no vote worth the name. It was, in structure, the ancestor of every corporate board that has ever met without you in the room. What they built has no real precedent. At its height, the company ran more than 150 merchant ships, 40 warships of its own, 50,000 employees, and a private army of 10,000 soldiers. Across 2 centuries, it would send nearly 1 million Europeans east on almost 5,000 voyages and bring back 2.5 million tons of Asian goods. No state in Europe moved that much, that far, that reliably. In 1619, the company took the port of Jakarta and built its Asian capital on the ruins. They called it Batavia. From there, a governor-general ruled the company's world, half a year's sailing from the men who supposedly employed him, with an army at his disposal and instructions that could never arrive fast enough to stop him. Distance in this story is the whole problem. Nutmeg grew in one place on Earth, a scatter of volcanic islands called the Bandas in the eastern Indonesian Sea. In Europe, the spice was worth more than its weight in gold, believed to cure plague. The company held a monopoly on paper, but the Bandanese had traded freely for centuries with anyone who sailed in, and they saw no reason to stop. That refusal was, to the company, an accounting problem. The man sent to solve it was Jan Pieter Zoon Coen. He was in his early 30s, austere, devout, and absolutely certain. He had already argued to his superiors that trade could not be held without war, and war could not be held without trade. In 1621, he sailed for the Banda Islands with a fleet, and the instruction he had asked for, to settle the matter permanently. What happened in the Bandas in 1621 is the darkest entry in the company's ledger. The islands were taken. The population, estimated at around 15,000 before the fleet arrived, was destroyed, killed, enslaved, starved, or driven out. Estimates of the toll vary widely, and historians dispute the precise numbers. What is not disputed is the scale. Over 9 in 10 Bandanese were gone. Most historians now call it genocide. The islands were reorganized into plantations and worked by people brought in from elsewhere. The monopoly was now real. For the next century and a half, the company controlled the world's supply of nutmeg and mace and set the price at will. On the balance sheet, the Banda campaign was a success. It is worth sitting with that sentence because the company's own accountants did and moved on. The money came home and it changed the Netherlands. A small waterlogged republic became the richest society in Europe. Canal houses went up, painters found patrons, and the exchange in Amsterdam became the place where the price of the world was decided. This is the Dutch Golden Age, and it was underwritten substantially by a single company's returns. How rich was it? By one widely repeated estimate, at its peak the company would be worth several $1 trillion today, more than the largest technology firms on Earth combined. That figure comes from adjusting old share prices across 4 centuries, and economists argue about the method, so treat it as a gesture rather than a measurement. The safer statement is simpler. No private company before or since has held that much of the world. Here is the thing that makes the collapse so hard to see coming. The company worked, not for a season or a decade, but for generations. Men joined it as boys and died in its service as old men, and their sons joined after them. When an institution has paid out for a century, nobody in it can imagine it stopping. That failure of imagination is not a footnote to the story, it is the story. The rot began somewhere unglamorous, the payroll. Company servants in Asia were paid badly, posted for years at a time, and strictly forbidden from trading on their own account. The rule was clear, the enforcement was 10,000 miles away, and the temptation was a warehouse full of goods. So they traded anyway, quietly, constantly, and at the company's expense. It compounded for decades. Cargo went missing between ship and warehouse. Books were dressed. Officials grew rich on salaries that could not have bought their houses. By the 1790s, the 4 letters had acquired a bitter joke in the Netherlands, that VOC stood for Vergaan onder corruptie, perished under corruption. It was never the company's name, but it was by then the company's obituary. Meanwhile, the world stopped cooperating. Competitors learned the routes. The English company grew teeth. Spices, once impossibly rare, became merely expensive and then ordinary. The company answered by shipping more goods at thinner margins, which meant more ships, more men, more forts, more cost, a bigger machine earning less on every turn of the wheel. So it borrowed. The company had always paid handsome dividends, and it kept paying them, sometimes out of loans rather than profits, because stopping would have announced the truth. Debt climbed against equity until by the 1780s, the ratio reached roughly 18-1. A firm that had once financed a nation was now being financed quietly by its own reputation. Then, in 1780, came war with Britain. The Royal Navy did to the company what no accountant could. It took the ships. British attacks in Europe and Asia cut the fleet roughly in half, seized cargo, and stripped away trading posts. Direct losses ran to 43 million guilders. The company had survived thin margins and theft for decades. It could not survive losing the sea. There were attempts to fix it. Committees, audits, reorganizations, stern letters from the 17, all of them founded on the same fact. The men who would have to enforce the reforms were the men profiting from their absence. You cannot audit an institution using the people whose income depends on the audit failing. By then, the company was not being robbed by outsiders. It was being carried off by its own staff. By the 1790s, the company was insolvent in everything but name, propped up by a government that could not afford to let it fall and could not afford to keep it. Revolution came to the Netherlands. The new Batavian Republic looked at the books, at the debts, at the territories scattered across Asia, and made the obvious decision. The charter would not be renewed. On the 31st of December 1799, the Dutch East India Company ceased to exist. Its debts, its ships, its forts, and its colonies passed to the Dutch state, which would hold some of them for another century and a half. There was no dramatic collapse, no run on the bank, no single ruinous day. The charter simply reached its end and was not renewed. 197 years closed with a signature. It is tempting to say corruption killed it, and the Dutch joke says exactly that. But the honest answer is duller and more useful. thin margins on a bigger and bigger operation, debt taken on to disguise the thinning, employees quietly taking what the structure invited them to take, and a war that removed the ships, no single blow. 100 small ones, each survivable, arriving together. For nearly 2 centuries, it was the most powerful company on Earth, and it left behind the stock exchange, the shareholder, the multinational, and the wreckage of the islands it emptied to control a spice. It did not fall to a rival or a revolution. It was hollowed out by the ordinary arithmetic of people taking a little, for a long time. Next, 2 inventors, 1 nation's electricity, and a public campaign so vicious it helped build the electric chair. The ledger always balances. Eventually.